Welcome back to CS201 walkthroughs. My name is Lukash, and today we're going to be tackling homework 0. So at the end of our last video, we left off with this document copy-paste, or this homework 0 text copy-pasted into our racket, into Dr. Racket, our .rkt document. The first thing I'm probably going to want to do here, I've just opened it up kind of freshly, so I'll press run, and we'll take a look at what happens. So even though I haven't written any code yet, we already have some stuff down here in the terminal. And you'll notice it says testing. Essentially what it's doing is Dr. Slade, or Professor Slade, has already written test cases for you. So if we run down to the very bottom of the document, there's some code here that runs every time you click run. It defines a testing flag. You don't have to really worry about what this stuff does. But you can see it kind of has, well, test hours. The function it's going to test is hours, and it's going to test it. You don't have to understand this yet, but it's basically saying x is greater than 0. So when you say how many hours you spent on this assignment, if it's greater than 0, you're going to pass this test. Same thing for these other ones. It's testing this function. This is the test input it gives it. And then this is the output it's looking for. So if we go down here, it says, well, it didn't pass because I got nothing, or an empty list, and I expected 0 pounds and 7 ounces. So it's saying I'm not yet passing this test. Same thing for the last one. I'm not passing that test yet because, well, let's see what it's looking for. It's basically asking, is the output a string? So my output's not a string, my output's an empty list. I failed that test. So let's go back up and see how we can, what the problems are and how we can write them in a way that passes the test cases. First thing you'll probably want to do is scroll up to where it says name and email address and write your name and email address in case you need to be contacted about your homework. And then we'll read through, let's read through the instructions really quickly. This file may be loaded into Racket, lines beginning with semicolons or comments, right? We know that. Homework 0 is 20 points, blah, blah, blah. One purpose of homework 0 is to make sure you can submit on the zoo system. You will receive no credit for this assignment unless you successfully use the submit system. So we'll have 2 other videos about how to submit your homeworks once it's done. You'll be submitting 2 files for homework 0. Name them homework 0, so undercase homework0.rkt, ignore this uppercase h, and response.pdf. Okay, now we get into the actual problems. Problem 0, one easy point. What it's saying here is essentially write how many hours you spent on this assignment. Obviously something we don't know yet. We haven't completed this assignment. We'll come back and do this later. You will receive no credit for this problem if you leave it as 0, so definitely remember to go back and change it after you're done. Okay, now into the real problems. Problem 1. Write a procedure. So it's write a procedure is the same as a function, or similar to a function, called kg2lb, or kilogram to pound, and then it has one input, which is the mass. Converts a mass in kilograms to the equivalent mass in pounds and ounces. There are 2.2 pounds per kilogram, 16 ounces in a pound. All values are rounded down to the nearest integer. So it seems like we're going to have to do some serious racket math here. I'll give you some functions that I bet will be helpful for you, and maybe I'll play around in the terminal a little bit to see if I can give you an example of how this might work. So the first thing I think we should ask ourselves with any function is, let's define the data types of the input and the output. So the input, in this case, it said is mass. And it looks to me like mass is always going to be an integer, right? A mass in kilograms. So that's probably going to be an integer or a number at least. So we're going to say our input is mass integer, the only input. The output of this function, well, let's look at what their example outputs are. So if you remember from our Racket vocabulary video, this is a list. It starts with a single quote, open parenthesis, and close with a close parenthesis. There's some stuff inside the list, which we'll think about too, right? So it's a list, and then what's in the list? Containing, let's try. So one function you'll find helpful, here I'll write helpful functions, is going to be the list function. And I'll show you what it does really easily, very simply. list, and then anything I put, it'll make a list out of them. Okay, so that's pretty easy, right? We know how to make our output into a list. Now we just have to figure out how to make this inner part. Okay, but we still don't know what data types these are yet. I mean, I guess we can imply that this is a number and this is a number. They have to be integers because it says in the problem, let's see where to go. It says all values are rounded down to the nearest integer, so this must be an integer and this is an integer. So let's see, list containing an integer, something, an integer, and something else. So now what are these things in terms of the data types we discussed in our previous video? Well, we can test it out. What would it look like if they were strings? So let's say for somehow I get my 45 pounds. If I make it a string and then 7 ounces, would this look right when I put it in my output? So when this runs, the output has double quotes around the strings, but this doesn't have double quotes around the strings. So that indicates to me that these should not be strings when I output them. So what's the other data type that we might be able to use here? Symbols, right? So if we list 45 and then pounds as a symbol, and then 7 and then ounces as a symbol, does that work? Oh, perfect, right? This looks exactly like what we want up here. So this is going to be an integer, symbol, integer, and then a symbol. So the next question, I guess the last question, is how do we get these two numbers? How do we get our input mass and we convert it into these integers? Well, let's just take an example. I'll walk through one with you and we'll see if you can code it out by yourself. So here we have 100 and we want to get to 45 pounds and 7 ounces. So 45, right, is the mass in, let's see, we're going from kilograms to pounds. Is that right? There are 2.2 pounds in a kilogram. I guess we're going from pounds to kilograms then, aren't we? Anyway, so we have to divide 100 by 2.2 either way, right? Here we do 100, well, there's some functions here, right? Here's a divide function. Divide 100, 2.2, and let's see what we get. Okay, so we got 45, just like we want to have 45, but with this decimal point and with a whole bunch of numbers after it, that's a little bit confusing. Let's add the divide symbol to our helpful functions. Something we can do to move this down to kind of get rid of everything after the decimal point is our function in bracket called floor. So if I do something, alright, floor 45.45454545, it'll give me 45.0. Which is a little bit closer. It's not quite what I want to do yet. I want 45 on its own. So another thing we can do is, if you watched the previous video, there are inexacts and exacts. So anything with a decimal point after it is not considered an exact. So if we do inexact to exact on 45.0, we'll get 45. Okay, so we got the first number, right? Here let's add inexact to exact to our helpful functions list. And another important feature is the order in which we do these, right? So first we divided 100 by 2.2, or the mass by 2.2. Then we floored it, and then we inexact to exacted it. So which one's going to be on the innermost of our parentheses, right? If I were to run this as one function, it would be inexact to exact is going to get executed last, so it's on the outside. And I'd run that on floor of divide mass by 2.2. This is only if I had something that's defined as mass, which I don't down here in my terminal, but mass will be replaced by 100 if you run this on, or if you run the function kg2lb on the number 100, and when I run this, I get 45. Okay, perfect. I'll let you try to figure out what to do for the ounces number, and I'll give you some helpful functions so you don't struggle too much. There's a remainder function. Important note is that the second argument has to be an integer. So if I want to do something like remainder 102.2, that's not going to work for me. It says contract violation, which basically means you didn't give me what I wanted. expected an integer in the argument position the second. So it wants this to be an integer. It's a pretty easy way to get around this. What if I just multiply them both by 10? So I do remainder times 10, 100, and times 10, 2.2. Okay, so that gives me something I can use. Alright, so we have remainder. Maybe we should have the times operator. I think that's all you need. Oh, and we mentioned floor. Okay, I'll let you figure out the rest. For problem 2, write a procedure candidate that takes no arguments. So if we look at the function call, there's only the function name, there's no arguments. It returns a string indicating your predicted Democratic presidential nominee. Please remember the difference between a procedural call and the evaluation of a variable. Interesting. So a procedural call is something like calling a function, right? And then the evaluation of a variable is something like, it's a good way to explain this. If I do something like this, define nominee Biden, and then I run that, it won't work. Because it's already defined nominee, but I'll say nominee 2. Define nominee 2 Biden. Here when I call, nominee 2 is now Biden. If I say something like string nominee 2, that will return true because nominee 2 is set to Biden. But this is not what we're supposed to be doing. Here nominee 2 is not a function. I cannot call nominee 2. Doesn't work. It says application, not a procedure. Okay? So we have to write a procedure. There's only one key difference which you might see between this defined statement and something like this defined statement. Right? If you look back at our racket vocabulary video, you'll see that this is a string, and all you need to do in this function is output a string. And remember from our defined statement, the first thing in the defined statement is the name of the function and its inputs. The second part is the output. So if you want your output to be a string that says Biden or Sanders or Buttigieg or Harris or Gillibrand or any of the others, all you have to do is put that here. The third problem asks us to find an article in the magazine Communications of the ACM in one of these issues, and then write a Word document or somehow get a PDF format document with your responses to these questions. Once you do that, make sure you click Run so you can test whether your functions work. If they do work, these X's should go away. Right, so if I, for instance, let's see, I'll change hours to, say I spend 3 hours on this. I'll click Run. This will tell me, okay, this is a test, you passed it. Just for fun, how about I cheat on one of these? I'll define KG2LB to output a list that says 45 ounces, 45 pounds, 7 ounces. So this is kind of cheating. This is only going to work for one test case. But if I run this, it'll say, oh, I messed up. 45 pounds. Since it's already in the list, I should not have the symbols there. Okay, let's try again. Here we go. It says KG2LB, okay, it passed this test case. So once you have them all saying okay or okay test, you're good to go. Save your document and move on to the submit video, as long as you've also finished your PDF. Thank you for watching this video walkthrough. Make sure to come to office hours or email the CS201 help email or post on Piazza if you have any questions. And I hope to see you in the next.